forward to this.
Alright guys, welcome back to episode 3 of our Beyond tutorial series. We're going to be going over chapter 3 from the DM guidebook, which will be linked in the video description. So let's get started. First, we want to add in a few new icons to use. So I already have these icons created. You can create your own or download them from our Discord if you'd like. So we're going to add those in here, and we're going to come and hit refresh, and you can see all of the icons are now in here. We have a car, a helmet, a jug of water, and some building interiors. So before we start doing anything with that, let's go over Adam a little bit more. So last time we talked about turfs and inheritance. So Adam is, as we said before, area, turf, object, mob. And these are the 4 main types we're going to be using in Dreammaker. So all of these inherit their properties from datum. Datum is the ancestor of all data types in DM. Anything we create, any new types we want to create ourselves, will always inherit from datum by default. So anything that datum has, any variables or procs, will automatically be transferred into any of its children, which would be Adam. So we'll start with area, and the draw order in DM is area is at the very bottom, turf goes right on top of that, object goes right on top of turfs, and mobs go right on top of objects. So areas are very simple. It's exactly how it sounds. This is just how we define an area of the world. You know, that can be outside, that can be inside, that can be water or town boundaries, whatever you want it to be. They're very easy to use. We already went over turfs. The inheritance works exactly the same as turf does. Area is part of Adam, which inherits from datum. So anything we set up in area can be accessed by all of its children. But anything we create for area does not mean it can be accessed by turf, because these do not inherit from each other. So, just follow the diagram here. Objects are very similar. It's just going to be exactly how it sounds, an object that is placed on the map. This can be a water jug, or a ball, or a chair, anything like that. And then finally we have mobs, and mobs are the bottom level, and it's any sort of live creature you're going to have in the world. That can be players and NPCs, enemies, all of that. And the inheritance structure is very similar. We start with datum, and that goes into Adam, and everything within Adam has their own inheritance, their own variables, their own procs. So let's jump back into the project, and next let's take a look at some of those default variables we were just talking about. So if we'd go into area, and we open this by pressing F1, remember, come here, we'll type area, and we'll come down here and we'll say variables for area. And you can see these are all the default variables that area will have. Easy. Same thing with turf, and we'll check the variables for turf. You're going to see a lot of similar variables, and that is because those come from datum, which you can find just by writing datum. So same with object. A little bit different things in here. And finally mob. A little bit different things in here as well. but nothing crazy. So let's go ahead and mess with some of these variables. Let's start by, let's create an object first. That should be fun. So come down here, we'll put it right here. So we're gonna make a new object, and we do that just by saying object, because we're pulling from Atom. And we'll say, make it the water jug first. No. Let's make the bookshelf. And we'll have our bookshelf in our interior. Right here, there's our bookshelf. So the icon that bookshelf will be using, we know is interior.dmi. And the icon state within interior.dmi is, I believe, just bookshelf. Yep. And if we compile and go into our map, you will see now we have object bookshelf. You click on it and just click anywhere, and now there's a bookshelf in the world. So if we were to build, compile and run, there's our bookshelf. Now by default we can just walk right over it. So we don't want to do that. It's a bookshelf. We should be able to walk through it. So we're just going to come down here, right where we created our object, and we're going to change one of the default variables. So we're going to change the density, and it is 0 by default, which means not dense. So we're going to change it to 1, which means that it is now a dense object. So compile and run. And now you can see we can't walk through it. So what's another variable? Let's say opacity. We're going to turn the opacity on as well. And if we go back into the game, you're going to see the default functionality for this is that it blocks line of sight. You can no longer see through it. You know, at the right angle you can, because we're using pixel movement, but for now just know that this is what opacity does. And we can do this with any of the variables that we were just looking up. If we were to come in here, any of these you can mess with. You can change its layer, map text, pixel offsets, but we'll get more into that later. So now let's go ahead and create our water jug object. So that's going to be a little different. It's going to be another object. We're going to call it water jug. And that's, of course, inheriting from object type. We're going to give it an icon, which is just going to be water jug.dmi. If we open it up, you can see we have our water jug, and we have 3 separate states: empty, half, full. So first let's go ahead and put this in our map. Let's give it a default icon state. We'll say that it is full by default. Now if we go into our map, compile, you can see our water jugs here. And we can put some water on the ground. Go into the game, we can walk over it. That's fine, it's water. But we can't do anything. There's nothing we can do. So let's make a verb to interact with this water that we just created. And to do that, we're just going to, still within our object water jug, we're going to come down here, and we're going to say verb, and we're going to call this verb sip. We're going to set source to view. Now, we talked about source before. Now in this sense, source is always whatever we're accessing. So in this instance, source is the water jug object. It's not the player. So keep that in mind. And we're just going to, when you use this, let's output a message. And we need to output this message to user, because user is always going to be whatever is calling this verb. And in this case, our user will be calling the sip verb. So we'll say user takes a refreshing sip. And then we're going to want to change the icon state to empty. Let's try that. So if you look at our commands up here, we have the 3 that we've created already. And we're going to walk over to the water, and you can see as we get close to it, our sip verb appears. We walk away, it disappears. So we'll come close, we'll click sip, and you can see the water disappeared. Granite takes a refreshing sip. Well, that's awesome, but we have 3 states for the water. Maybe we want to go a little more in depth with that. So let's create a variable for this water jug. And it's just like creating a verb, except a variable is to store a piece of information. If you're familiar with programming, you already know what a variable is, but it's just to store a piece of information. So we're creating a new variable named water level. We're going to set the value to 2. And every time the game launches, water level is going to be 2. So now that we know that, we can come into our sip verb and we'll do a check. So we'll say if, remember, source is the water jug in this instance. So if source is water level is greater than 0, then we're going to take a sip. And so this, if you don't know what an if statement is, it's very self-explanatory. We're just doing a check here, and we're saying if this value meets this requirement, is equal to this value or is less than this value, you know, any sort of argument we want, we could say is equal to if we'd like to, but we want to do is greater than. So you're going to take a sip, and we need to know that we took a sip of water. So we're going to say, okay, well, now the water jug's water level is going to go down by 1. We're just going to put minus minus, and that just means that minus is 1. We could also do minus equals 1. We could also, and this is the same as saying water level is equal to water level minus 1. It's just an easier way to write it, so we're just going to do minus minus. So now water level's value will be decreased by 1. Remember, we're checking to make sure that it's greater than 0 before we can run any of this code. So we're going to do that, and let's set the icon state based on what the water level is. So for that, we're going to do a switch statement. And if you feel overwhelmed with this, don't worry. We'll be going into more of these later. I'm just trying to give you guys a general feel for these concepts. It's very, very simple to do. So we're just going to do a switch statement. And for the switch, we want to check the value of water level, our water jug's water level. And we're going to say if water level's value is 0, well, then we want to set the icon state to to empty. If the water jug's water level value is 1, then we want to set it to half. Is it half or, yeah, H. Yeah, make sure these are just lining up. And then if, for some reason, if we were refilling the water perhaps, if the water level is 2, well then it should be full. So let's give that a try. We'll compile and run. And we'll come over here and we'll take a sip. And you'll see we take a sip and the water level went down. So we'll take another sip and the water level went down again. If we try to take another sip, nothing happens. And that's exactly what we want, because in here we're checking this code will only run if this if statement is true. So because water level reaches 0, it no longer meets this check, and now it will no longer work. So if the switch statement is a little confusing for you, don't worry. Like I said, we'll go over it at another time. So let's do another verb. This time we're going to make a verb for the mob. And we have this really cool helmet icon, which you can see here. And this helmet icon is animated. If you come in here, you can see it has animation states. And these actually line up with our player. It's going to be the same animation states. So we want to overlay this helmet on the player and have it animate exactly the same, so it looks like he's wearing a helmet. And it's really easy to do in DM. We'll set up a really simple way. So all we're going to do is, we're already creating mob verb, so we're going to make a new verb. We'll call it toggle helmet. And we just want to do a check to see if the mob is wearing a helmet or not. And to do that, we're going to do an if statement just like the water jug, but now we need a variable to check. So let's make a quick variable. So we'll say mob, a variable. It's a variable that all mobs are going to have. And we'll name this wearing helmet. And by default, it will be false. So now, mob verb, we're going to say if the mob's variable wearing helmet is false, then let's output a message and say we're not wearing a helmet. Let's put one on. And then we're going to change the variable we created to true, because now we're going to be wearing a helmet. And we're just going to say, source. You don't have to put source in front of these. By default, any variables you reference will run as if source is written in front of it, but it's good practice when you're learning to write source that you can learn the difference between source and user. So in this instance, because we're working within mob, source is the mob. So we're going to say source overlays. And all we're going to do is say plus equals. We're going to give it the icon, which is just helmet.tmi. So all this does is our mob has access to a list of overlays, and all we're doing is adding this icon to it. It's that easy. That's all we're doing. We're setting the icon to it. So if we were to run, you'll see we have toggle helmet. We will click it, and you'll see the helmet appeared. We'll say we're not wearing a helmet. Let's put one on. If you click it again, nothing happens because we're already wearing the helmet. It's doing this if check here. So it's not going to keep spamming this and putting new helmets on. So that's not much of a toggle verb. So let's create the alternative. So now we're going to write else. And else doesn't need an argument. It's attached to this if statement. And so we have if wearing helmet is false, run this code. Otherwise, meaning if wearing helmet is true, let's run the code within our else statement. And we'll put another world output. We'll say we already have a helmet. Let's remove it. We're going to do the same thing here, just in reverse. We're going to say our mob's wearing helmet variable is now false. And we're going to remove the overlay, minus equals helmet.dmi. So if we go ahead and run this, overlays, compile and run. And we toggle the helmet. We put one on. We toggle it again. We already had one, so we take it off. And you can spam click this and it won't, put a bunch of helmets on you. And that's that. One last thing. We're just going to create one last object. We're not going to do anything with it yet. We're going to create our car. Take a look at this. So you can see we have no name assigned to this, and because there's no other states within this DMI, we don't have to give it an icon state right here. It'll still know that's what it should be using. So if we were to compile and we open up the map, you'll see we have an object, car. So we'll put this car right there on the map. And we'll make it dense so we cannot walk right through it. And there's our car. So we'll do something fun with that next time. But for now, that's it. So if you have any questions, you're confused about anything, feel free to join our Discord. We're more than happy to help. We have several people in there that can help you out. If you want to get the icons, those are also straight in the Discord. So that's it, and we'll see you next time.